I was raised in a house where silence wasn't peace, it was control. Every morning started the same way. My mother would knock exactly twice on my door, not once more, not once less, as if even her affection had a schedule. My father would already be at the dining table, reading the newspaper like the world outside mattered more than the daughter sitting across from him. And I would sit there too, trained to smile, trained to agree, trained to disappear quietly inside my own life. They used to call me their perfect daughter. I was perfect because I never questioned them, perfect because I topped my classes, perfect because I never stayed out late, never raised my voice, never brought shame to the family name that they guarded more fiercely than my happiness. In their world, I wasn't a person. I was a reputation, and then I met him. His name didn't matter to them the moment they heard it. What mattered was what he wasn't. He wasn't from their circle. He wasn't from their standards. He didn't come with wealth wrapped in inheritance or connections that could be spoken proudly at gatherings. He came with kindness, patience, and a way of listening that made me feel like I existed for the first time. That was my crime. I remember the first time I mentioned him at the dinner table. I didn't even finish the sentence. My father's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. No, he said calmly, as if he had already decided without hearing anything. My mother didn't even look at me. You'll forget this phase, she added softly, like she was talking about a fever, not my feelings. But I didn't forget him. I tried to explain. I tried to make them see what I saw. The way he respected me, the way he never tried to change me, the way I didn't feel small when I was with him. But every word I spoke sounded like noise to them. In their minds, love was not something you discovered. It was something they assigned. The more I defended him, the more their disappointment turned into concern. And that concern slowly hardened into something colder. You're not thinking clearly, my mother said one evening while folding laundry. Her hands moved carefully, like she was folding my future into something smaller. People like him confuse young girls. I'm not confused, I replied quietly. My father finally looked at me that night, not as a daughter but as a problem that needed fixing. You're emotional. This is temporary. We'll handle it. Handle it. That word stayed in my mind longer than anything else. At first, I thought it was just resistance. Parents always resist what they don't understand. I believed it would pass. I thought love would eventually soften them the way it softened me. But love didn't soften anything in that house. It sharpened everything. They started watching me differently. My phone calls became suspicious. My smiles became evidence. Even the way I sat at the table felt like something they were analyzing. One evening, I overheard my mother speaking to my aunt in the kitchen. Her voice was low, but not low enough. She's getting worse, she said. My aunt replied, maybe she just needs time. My mother paused. Or professional help. That was the first time the word help didn't sound like care. It sounded like a decision already made. I stood outside that kitchen door for a long time after that, feeling something inside me shift, not break, not yet, but change shape. Like the ground beneath, my life had quietly started to tilt, because I understood something that night. They weren't preparing to accept my choice. They were preparing to erase it. After that night in the kitchen, everything in my home changed in ways that were subtle enough to deny, but obvious enough to feel like a tightening rope. My mother started watching me like I might suddenly disappear or explode. My father stopped arguing with me altogether. That worried me more than his anger ever did. Silence in that house was never peace. It was preparation. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. People don't just turn on their own child. Families argue, yes, but they don't plan. That word felt too heavy, too extreme, until I heard it again. It was a late evening when I passed by my parents' room. The door was slightly open, just enough for voices to leak through like cracks in a wall. I wasn't trying to listen. I was just walking by, but then I heard my name and I stopped. My father's voice was low, controlled. "She's not listening anymore." My mother replied quickly, almost too quickly. "She's obsessed. It's not just rebellion now." A pause followed. A long one, then my father spoke again. "We need to consider temporary placement." I didn't understand at first. My brain refused to translate it into anything real. Temporary placement could mean anything. College, a trip, therapy. Then my mother said the words that froze me where I stood. Psych evaluation would be safer, safer. That word again, always used like a blanket over something sharp. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself, because suddenly the house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a system, a machine quietly adjusting parts that didn't fit. My father continued, "If she refuses help, we can't just watch it escalate. We have responsibility. Responsibility. Not love, not concern, responsibility, as if I was a mistake they had to correct." My mother's voice softened, but not in a comforting way. It was the tone of someone sealing a decision. "We can't let her ruin her future over this phase." They had reduced everything I felt, everything I had chosen, into a temporary malfunction. I stepped back silently, my heart beating so loudly I was afraid they might hear it through the walls. I walked down the hallway without making a sound, the same hallway I had run through as a child, the same floor that once felt safe. Now it felt like it was leading me somewhere I didn't choose. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every word. Psych evaluation, temporary placement, responsibility. Each phrase fit together like pieces of a plan I had never been invited to see, but was clearly part of. The worst part wasn't even fear yet. It was realization. They weren't debating anymore. They weren't trying to understand. They had already moved past that stage. This wasn't about conversation. It was about execution. By morning, they were different again, too calm, too normal. My mother made breakfast like nothing had happened. My father asked me how I slept like he hadn't spoken about my future being taken away the night before. That kind of normality is its own kind of violence. I tested them gently at first. I mentioned my boyfriend's name again, watching their reactions closely. My mother's smile didn't change. "We'll talk about your priorities later," she said. My father didn't even look up from his phone. "Focus on yourself for now." For now, everything had time limits suddenly. My love, my choices, my voice. That afternoon, I noticed unfamiliar papers on my father's desk, forms, medical-looking documents. My name wasn't fully visible, but I saw enough clinical language, evaluation requests, signatures partially filled in. My stomach dropped. They weren't just talking, they were arranging. I backed away before anyone saw me, my mind racing, trying to find logic in something that no longer made sense. Parents are supposed to protect you. Families are supposed to argue, then forgive. But what do you do when protection becomes confinement? That was the moment I understood something irreversible. I was no longer in a debate, I was in a plan. And I was never supposed to know it existed. The morning they came for me didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like the world continuing normally while something inside it quietly broke. My mother woke me up earlier than usual. Her voice was gentle in a way that made my skin crawl. "Get ready, we have an appointment," she said from the doorway. "What appointment?" I asked, still half asleep. She smiled too quickly. "Just a checkup, nothing to worry about." Nothing to worry about? That phrase had become their favorite lie. I sat up slowly, watching her carefully. She avoided my eyes. That was new. My mother always looked directly at me when she wanted me to believe something. Downstairs, my father was already dressed, unusually formal. A man I didn't recognize stood beside him near the entrance. He wore a neutral expression, the kind people use when they are trying not to feel anything at all. "Who is he?" I asked. My father answered before anyone else could. "A professional. He'll accompany us." Accompany us. Not me, us. My chest tightened, but I didn't speak. I had already learned that questions only made them build stronger walls. The car ride was silent. Not peaceful silent, controlled silent. My mother sat beside me, holding her handbag too tightly. My father sat in front, speaking softly to the man in the passenger seat about process and assessment. Words I wasn't supposed to understand were being used about me like I wasn't there. When we arrived, the building looked too clean, too white, too quiet. It didn't look like a place where people went to get help. It looked like a place where stories were rewritten. Inside, the air smelled like antiseptic and patience. A receptionist greeted us with a practiced smile. My name was already on a list. That realization hit me harder than anything else. I hadn't been brought here to be introduced. I had been expected. Everything moved too smoothly, too rehearsed. A woman in a white coat stepped forward, shaking my father's hand. "We've reviewed the concerns," she said gently. "Concerns, not feelings, not arguments, concerns." I turned to my parents. "What is this?" My mother touched my arm lightly. "Just cooperate," she whispered. "This is for your future, my future." They were speaking about it like it was still theirs. "I don't need this," I said firmly. The doctor tilted her head slightly, observing me the way one might observe a pattern that didn't fit. "She's resistant," she said calmly. Resistant, that word again, like I was a problem responding correctly. My father exhaled slowly. "She doesn't see clearly anymore." I laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "You're talking about me like I'm not here." That was when the shift happened. The calmness tightened into procedure. "Let's proceed with evaluation," the doctor said. Two staff members approached, not aggressively, not violently, just decisively, like everything had already been decided before I arrived. I stepped back instinctively. "Don't touch me." My voice didn't sound loud, but it sounded real, and that seemed to disturb them more than anger ever could. My mother's eyes finally met mine. For a brief second, I saw something there. Fear, maybe guilt, but it vanished quickly. "She'll calm down once she understands," she said, but I understood everything now. This wasn't concern. It was containment. I looked at my father. "You're really doing this." He didn't answer immediately. That silence told me more than words could. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant. "We're doing what's necessary." Necessary. As if love had become a calculation. The staff stepped closer again, and in that moment, something inside me stopped waiting for permission. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to explain myself to people who had already decided my truth. Instead, I looked at every face in that room, my parents, the doctor, the staff, and I memorized them. Because even if I walked into whatever they had planned for me, I was no longer going in blind. They thought silence meant surrender. That was their first mistake. After everything at the clinic, I didn't argue anymore. I didn't plead. I didn't try to convince my parents that I was still the same person they had raised. Something inside me had already crossed a line they couldn't see. From that moment, I stopped trying to be understood by people who had already decided to misunderstand me. They let me go home that evening, calling it observation pending further review, a controlled phrase, a temporary release, but I knew what it really meant. I was still inside their reach. That night, my house felt different again. Not calmer, just quieter in a more dangerous way. My mother tried to act normal, placing dinner on the table like nothing had happened. My father barely spoke, but their eyes kept drifting toward me, as if waiting for me to collapse into the version of myself they could justify. I went to my room early, and there, for the first time, I stopped reacting emotionally and started thinking strategically. They had built a story about me, a story where I was unstable, confused, influenced, and they were using that story to justify removing my choices. If I fought them with words, they would always twist it back into their version of reality. So I didn't fight with words. I reached for my phone. My hands were steady in a way they had never been before. I opened my gallery, scrolling past normal photos, small moments, faces, memories, until I found the one I had taken earlier that day without anyone noticing. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't emotional, it was proof. I stared at it for a long time before sending it, because I knew the moment it left my phone, nothing would stay the same again. Then I pressed send. No message, no explanation, just the photo. Within minutes, my father's phone rang. I heard it from the other room, sharp, immediate, urgent. The kind of call that interrupts certainty. Then another call, then another. Voices started rising downstairs. Not loud at first, controlled confusion, then slowly unraveling. I stayed in my room, listening. My mother's voice cracked through the hallway. What do you mean this is real? A pause, then my father lower, sharper. Where did she get this? Another pause? Longer this time, and then something I had never heard in that house before. Uncertainty. They came to my door. Not slowly this time, quickly, disrupted. My mother opened it first. Her face looked different, like someone had taken the script away from her mid-scene. What did you send? She asked. I looked up at her calmly. The truth. My father stepped in behind her, holding his phone. His hand wasn't as steady as before. This is not possible, he said. For the first time, he didn't sound in control. I stood up slowly. You tried to take away my voice, I said. So I showed you what happens when I don't use it. My mother's expression shifted, fear and realization colliding. You're trying to destroy this family, she whispered. I almost laughed, but it came out soft instead. No, I said. I'm showing you what you already did. Silence filled the room, not the controlled kind they used before. A real silence, heavy, uncomfortable, honest. My father looked at me differently then, not as a problem, not as a daughter, but as something he could no longer categorize. What do you want? He asked finally. It wasn't a command, it wasn't control. It was the first real question he had asked me in years. I walked past them and opened my door wider, letting the hallway light spill into the room. I want my life back, I said simply, and for the first time neither of them had a response ready. Because whatever they had planned for me was no longer working, and the photo I sent them wasn't just an image. It was the beginning of the end of their control.